All right, so we're doing more of what we did before, which is highly technical passages. So let's take a look at exactly what we mean by that. So again, here's the copyright notice just to get it on the recording. These problems are from the free GMAT prep, except as indicated otherwise. So in fact, all of these are from the free GMAT prep. Okay, so what we've said before, here's a passage. Here's a passage that's full of words. There are a lot of words in the passage. If anybody remembers what we said from before, or just in general, like what's the deal with passages like this? Can anybody summarize in the chat? Like why do they do this? Why do they throw passages like this at you? What skills are they testing? The question, in other words, is why do RC passages so often contain so much detail about stuff you probably don't know about? So confuse is, there's a couple of responses here that are interesting. There's a difference between these two responses, which maybe these two people actually meant more of the same thing than they're saying, but distract and confuse are very different things. I suppose they're both related in the sense that both of them are kind of, you're not getting the main message, but distract is you're not getting the main message because there are other things pulling your attention away from it. Whereas confuse is you're not getting the message because the message just does not make sense or it's not communicated well. And in general, they're not, remember, like one thing about this exam is that nothing is really done in a way that is tricky or in a way that is a bad presentation. Those things don't really happen here. So confuse, honestly, is not really the point. The point is more like distract. So, and maybe the person who said confuse, maybe you actually meant something more like distract, but sure. So, yeah, that's one point. We'll see why in a sec, sure. And then get the main idea. See, learn how to synthesize. Okay, these are pretty good. Read between lines, again, that's a phrase that has a certain meaning. Let's put some of these up there. So if someone says relevant, relevant is, I mean, of course you want to see what's relevant, but the problem is that relevant is depending on the task. I mean, for example, if you were tested on these things the way you were tested back in school, then relevant would probably mean something that had more to do with facts. You know, just random fact would suddenly be relevant. So, so to make it more difficult, again, possibly. I mean, make it difficult kind of makes it sound like they're writing badly on purpose, or they're kind of presenting things in a way that is misleading, which is not really what they're doing. I mean, I feel like you have, Olu, I think you have the right idea. I think just the words are a little bit, I think you're expressing the right idea in words that are not quite what you mean. Because when you say, and this might even be something that would relate to sentence correction, like when you say to make something difficult, that means that you are actually taking something and making it harder. And that's probably not really what you mean. It's probably more like, which is not the same as this. I think you meant something more like to choose readings in which it may be difficult to get easy, or something, because those things, something like that, right? Because they don't want it to be too simple necessarily. But to make it like that is like they actually take the passage and they purposely dither it up to make it worse. Not really what they're doing there. So yeah. Okay. Other things people wrote which are pretty accurate. You do want to get the main idea. Absolutely. To test whether this is a very nice summary right here. To test whether you get stuck in details versus understanding the big picture. There's another phrase here which perhaps you might not mean exactly the way you're using it. What this means is this phrase that's right here, reading between the lines. Yeah, at least in American English, when we say this means more like picking up implications that are not really there, or like a tone of it, or something like this, or like vague suggestions is kind of what reading between the lines is. And that's not really what they do on this test because it's a standardized test. I mean, they couldn't really make vague suggestions. So, I mean, with the detail-based questions, there's going to be very hard evidence for the choices that are correct. I mean, maybe you meant something different by that, but when we say read between the lines, reading between the lines is kind of like, if you write one of those very polite sounding letters that is actually really angry with the corporation or something like that, like because it's formal writing, so it still looks very polite, but actually you're really pissed. That's kind of what it means when we say read between the lines. So they don't do that here because there's no tone of the passage or emotional content, or like I actually don't mean what I'm saying, but yeah. The important stuff there is the point. Sure. So exactly. This is the best summary of what was typed there. Test whether you can understand the big picture without getting stuck in details. Because again, this is the GMAT. The GMAT is a test for people who ostensibly want to become managers. And this is what management is all about. It's all about not paying attention to details. Pretty much. I mean, there are exceptions. There are exceptions when your attention is called to details in particular. But basically, management is pretty much on some level not paying attention to details. Unless your attention is specifically called to them. So, and that's just reflected in both parts of the RC task. So unless your attention is specifically called to that. Okay. So this actually encompasses both parts of the RC, right? This is the main idea questions, the not paying attention to details part. And then the part where your attention is specifically called to those details. Because again, if you're the manager, then in some situation or another, you're going to be the final say on certain issues. So an issue lands on your desk that is about details. Eventually, you got to handle it. So this is both sides of the issue. Not paying attention to details is your main idea questions. Because that's the usual understanding that managers need. Okay, what does this mean overall? What does it mean for the client? What does it mean for the customer? What does it mean for so-and-so? But then at the same time, at the same time, if people bring specific issues to your attention, then you should be able to research them and figure out what is or isn't supported. So, okay, well, let's take a look at this passage that's on the screen. So remember, the deal is when there's a bunch of stuff, it's kind of hard, it becomes harder to just reduce it to a main idea. So let's just make sure that we remember, what do you do when you first read the passage? Like, what should you be doing when you first read in quotes? Because it's not really reading, so let's put it in quotes. What should you do? And when I'm saying what should you do, I mean, this is kind of, if you've ever watched really any of these sessions, you're going to know that I don't really like vagueness. So, like something like this, the problem with this is that this doesn't really mean much. Like, look at the structure. What does that mean? Like, I'm looking for something where you should actually give instructions in terms of what should you do. It doesn't have to be step 1, step 2, step 3, but you need to give instructions that are actually specific enough that someone else could decently follow them. So the problem is, I think most other people would be like, I don't really know what this means. So this is too vague to be instructions. And I mean, also, I think a lot of people don't think enough about this. I think they have ideas in their head that are sort of half-formed, but are not specific enough to help with the process. I mean, this is not quant, but the same sort of thing happens in quant, right? I mean, one of the biggest reasons why people have issues with data sufficiency is because they never really determine what sufficient and insufficient mean concretely, right? Like, for example, in data sufficiency, a lot of people say not sufficient means I don't know. The problem is that's not, you can't tell someone to do that if they're executing a data sufficiency problem, because you can't solve a problem and get I don't know out of it. But not sufficient means I can make 2 or more results happen in the problem. Aha, there you go. Right, I mean, this is concrete. This is something you can actually try to do. This is not concrete. So, I mean, I know the books use the word structure in various places, but when you see things in books that are not something you can actually act on, you should change it into something that is. Okay, so there's a lot of words here. Let's take a look. So same thing, to understand what the author is trying to say, that could mean kind of anything, so trying to be more specific than that. This is, let me highlight a couple of these. While I'm grabbing a couple of these off of here, someone tell me what the response to that is. Should we not scan through the questions first? What's the answer to that? Yeah, only one person really gave the right answer to that. I mean, you know that you can't. It's physically impossible. I remember how this works, right? There's no such thing as scanning the questions. I mean, you have to, you can't move forward or backward through the questions. So it's not, this is not even a thing. It's not even possible. But also, I mean, you shouldn't, if the first question is a detail question, you should definitely not look at it first. Because if you do, all you're doing is making the situation worse. Because consider, I mean, eventually you're going to have to get the main idea anyway. But if you waste your time looking for the first detail first, if you look for this detail right away, you will have absolutely no idea where to find it. So in other words, you're just putting off a task that you're gonna eventually have to do anyway. And then because you don't have any sort of guide or anything like that, you're going to not have any clue where to look for it. So you're going to make that take longer, and you're still going to have to spend all the time later anyway, which is not really a great, which is not really a great result. So, okay, here are some things. Some things that people wrote. I like this table of contents. I think we've presented it as like this way before. Just think about what a table of contents is. What a table of contents does is two things. Like, think about an actual table of contents from an actual book. And I mean, Gabe, if this is what you mean by a passage map, then then that's it, if it means something along these lines. But again, remember, you would have to, if you were giving instructions, you would have to explain to somebody what passage map means. Whereas table of contents, that's if you've ever looked at a book before, then you understand what a table of contents is. So that makes this a better concept to use. Because if you think about it, this is a very good analogy for what you want to do. Think about what tables of contents do. I mean, how are they made? Well, they basically just have the main deal of each unit, of each chapter or whatever of a book. So, table of contents shows the main purpose of each part, or basically the deal of each part, but without details. So in terms of main idea questions, if you make a table of contents, it should enable you to answer the question. It should let you predict the answer. But then in terms of detail questions, I mean, this is why it's good to think about it as a table of contents, because you can literally use it as a table of contents. You can use it in the same way. You can go find stuff with it. So for details, just like an actual table of contents, your table of contents should help you find stuff faster. Okay, so keep that in mind. So there's a passage on the board, and you may have been doing this for some time already because it's been on the board for a while. But take about, and again, the point is that this is not enough time to read through all the words. Let's say take 1 to 2 minutes to make a table of contents for the passage on the board. So just do that. If you're going to take notes, take notes. I would suggest taking at least some skeleton of notes just to maintain your attention. But at the same time, if you want to experiment with not taking notes, you can. Just try what works for you. Take 1 to 2 minutes, give it a shot. Okay, do we mostly have some sort of table of contents here? Probably have something. We'll produce an example here in a sec. But here is something you might want to do. Again, I'm always going to put might in front of this because you might want to, you might not. Depends on your personal preferences and your style of learning and all that stuff. But what you might want to do first is make a table of contents as you go. But then you might want to go back after you're done. You might want to make an even more condensed version. What would be the point of that? Like, why would you want to bother taking notes? Because the table of contents is probably kind of condensed already. So what would be the point of making an even more condensed version? And how condensed am I talking about here? Like, how many words? Like, actually, how many words? A number of words. So like 5 is not bad. Yeah, 3 to 10 is probably about, 10 is still more than I'm talking about here. But maybe 10 max, right? Let's say 3 to 10 words. Let's say 5 to 10 words. Because why? What is the point of doing this in so few words? Not random. It's a lot more specific than that. And it's a lot more specific than that, too. I mean, why are you even doing this? Ultimately, we do all of this so that we can do what with it? Use it to, so you can answer the questions that are actually on the test. I mean, remember, guys, you got to have goals. You have to have goals that are specific. I mean, it took about 8 responses before somebody said, I need to use this to answer the questions on the test. Maybe that sounds like it's obvious enough that that wasn't what I was looking for, but it's definitely what I was looking for. And a lot of people totally forget that the point is to answer a question that is on the test. It's the same thing that happens in the quant section where, you have this question that has like 5 answers that are like 1,000,000 miles apart, and then you estimate, and as soon as you get to a point where you know which one it is, you're done. You don't need to keep going, right? So just don't forget that you're trying to answer questions that are on the test. So the direct point here is to answer the main idea questions. And so this is typically how long the answer choices are. So by reducing it to about, this is not a random size, and this is not a size that stands for an abstraction like important points. But basically this is what answer choices look like for main idea questions. So you want to get it to a point where it imitates that. So here's a sample. Should we make for each paragraph? I'm not, maybe. I mean, your condensed version here will probably still have parts that correspond to the individual paragraphs. But, all right. Because again, you know, make sure that make sure that this is instructions. Make sure that it makes sense. You know, so refresh your memory. That might be the purpose behind it, but just make sure that you have some sort of specific guideline here. But not so specific that you can't think anymore. So, right. So first, let's talk about this. Make table of contents, right? So, okay, we have a model. There's already a lot of whoa, so many words. I mean, it's supposed to explain something with businesses. Okay. So there's a model, the DD model. Paragraph 1 is, how does this model work? Summary. Okay. Now, as long as things look like they are just, here is how the model works, you know what? I don't have to read them. So, according to this model, blah, 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 blah. Definitely, I don't need to read these words. And then this is just more explanation of the same words. This is just more at low density levels, blah, blah, blah. This occurs because blah, not much reason to pay attention to any of that. And then you have a however here, but this is still talking about objective predictions that this model makes. So honestly, I don't have to read anything in this here at all. It's not really much point. So if you spent more than a few seconds scrolling through this part, that's a less than optimal use of your time, because this is just specifics of the model or predictions that it would make. Okay. I mean, you can write that in the notes if you want to. Specifics or predictions. But that's it. I mean, to reinforce this whole table of contents idea, like if you happen to spend more than, say, 10 seconds just meandering through this part, I mean, imagine that you get paid to make tables of contents. Like, you do that. You do it for a living. And you get paid per tables of contents that you make. Imagine how much of a hurry that you would be in to get through this part. I mean, this would not be slow. You would probably not get caught up in these details unless they were, for some reason, of interest to you. You want to get paid. You want to just make everything and get on with it. And so once you write down, okay, this is what it is, your job here is done. Predictions. Okay. Now let's look at this next part. While several studies have found a correspondence between that model and reality, also sometimes it has not matched that. So, and what you might want to do, like when you see these kinds of sentences that are clearly like headline type sentences, just make sure that you understand what they mean, and what understand implies is like, can you explain this to a 9-year-old? Is the way that that's the standard that I usually apply, at least. So what does it say? So, well, this means sometimes reality looks like the model. Other times it doesn't. Okay, that's pretty much what that says. So, in other words, sometimes it is inconsistent with that. What are we doing there? Well, a possible explanation for why it doesn't look like the model is blah, 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 and then thus something can misrepresent something in blah, blah, blah ways. And then many industries are blah, this just kind of looks like examples of what we just said. And for example is definitely another example of what we just said. All right. And then blah, 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 studies have found more support for our model when they employ broader something. Okay. Notice that this is worth noting as a sentence just because look at what the topic is. The topic is inconsistency. And this is like, whoa, there's more consistency when, right? So that is big relationship to this, as opposed to just seeing stuff about tech firms and new firms and international firms and stuff that's clearly just details. Like when something relates directly back to what we're talking about, it's worth your attention. So something like this. Pay attention to this because pay more attention here because there's a very clear relationship to the heading of the paragraph. And what I'm saying is pay more attention to this part that is right here, this part. Okay, so what is going on in this paragraph? What notes would you, what in the chat box? What might you have taken for paragraph 2? Because paragraph 1's easy, right? It's just, okay, boom, here's a model and here's what it says. It's kind of all of paragraph 1. Not much hard there. What do you think the overall shy crowd here? How many people are typing? Do you think the overall point is that the model is not very good or that the model is still good? So we have opposing opinions here. I mean, we have like better than nothing makes it sound like not very good. So a couple people are just saying not very good. So here's where you have to employ your everyday normal common sense and just kind of think about what would happen if the same thing occurred with a more closer to the ground topic of conversation. Like here, let's say this. So, okay, the U.S. government, or like the U.S. health system, for example, uses the body mass index. You may have heard this thing, BMI, they call it. As a measure of whether an individual is overweight. Okay, and then there's some details about this. It's a formula with, it's actually a formula with that only takes account of height and weight. All right, now as far as the second paragraph here, here's an analogy of what would be in the second paragraph. So for some, for some people, like for many people, this measure correlates with actually being overweight. On the other hand, for some, people it doesn't. So in particular, so for others, it doesn't. And then, for example, if you are a guy who has a lot of muscle mass, then it will say that you are overweight even if you're not. So blah, 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 that content would be in here somewhere, you know, like according to the BMI. Men with lots of muscle will always be overweight, even if they are very, very lean. So, but then this last sentence is kind of like, for example, the BMI is a better measure as long as you take that into account. So as long as you take muscle mass into account, this you can use the BMI. You can adapt it to this group too. Okay, so here the point is probably more clear. The point here is not we should throw out the BMI. It's a terrible model. Because we say, okay, it works for a lot of people. That's point number one. And then even when it doesn't work, you can still salvage it. You can still do something with it to make it work again. Is how you would explain that to a 9-year-old. You know, even when it looks like it goes wrong, even when it does go wrong, you can fix it. You can tweak it, you can adjust it. So that it works again. That's what I'm saying. So overall here, the point is that the model is valid, and it doesn't, when it is very simplistic, it will diverge from actual reality, but that this is not a fatal problem here. So that's what they're saying. So as far as paragraph 2, you do have some inconsistencies. I mean, you have some divergences from reality. Some inconsistencies with reality. But then fixes for those things. How to fix additional factors to fix those things. All right. I mean, this is already kind of condensed. I mean, this is a decent summary already. But if you want to condense this even further, my condensed version, well, what's some of your guys? I mean, what, do you guys have any 5 words or so, 5 to 10 words condensed versions of this? We have one ready to go. If it's, yeah, it shouldn't take too long to type in the chat. It's got 5 words. All right, yeah, the vpool, that one's pretty good. Olu, that one's pretty good too. Hanking, I don't love DD model in reality because it doesn't really say what about the reality. I mean, the reality could mean anything from it is exactly correct to it is totally wrong and useless, anywhere in between. So, and the point, I wouldn't stop at the inconsistencies, Vic, because notice that the rest of this whole thing is about how to resolve those. So you don't want to leave that out. I mean, there's a whole paragraph here about what factors we should add in. So fixes, I actually like vpools. Let's just take that one basically. So paragraph 1 is a model. And paragraph 2 is potential problems, potential shortfalls. And then let's call them refinements to the model. Because that's what paragraph 2 is. It's kind of like saying, as long as we take into account these extra things. With our analogy here, as long as we take muscle mass into account with BMI, then BMI is okay. It's like that, which is basically what Bippel said. But when you write, for the second paragraph, make sure it doesn't just say like model in reality, because then you're not saying what it does or doesn't do. And then also don't stop at inconsistencies, because the point is not that there are fatal inconsistencies. The point is that you can resolve those. So here's the deal. Now we have 2 things. I mean, in general, there's not a ton of difference between these 2. These 2 are pretty close to each other. But these 2 that are about to appear on the board. In general, there's going to be a bigger difference. So the idea is that you have 2 versions of your table of contents. This version is going to be, in general, more helpful for finding details. In other words, for use as an actual table of contents, literally. Whereas this version is probably going to be more useful for answering main idea questions, because it will resemble the answer choices more. So, okay, if you have just so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time here, here is a main idea question. We've talked about this, I'm pretty sure we talked about it in our last session, which was 3 weeks ago. So the point with main idea questions, let me give you guys the answer choices. The point with main idea questions is that you should be well equipped to answer them already. So do not look at the answer choices first. Look at your notes. Predict the answer by yourself. And look for a match in the choices. And also don't forget where you find answers to multiple choice options. Those are whoa, so big. Those are here. So please not in the chat box. Okay. Should have a prediction by this point. There's still quite a few of you guys who don't have the right choice. Here is our condensed table of contents, as it were. The condensed version was this. Let's just put it on top of it. Okay, so there's a model, and then there are shortfalls, but then we fix those. So if you look at this table of contents condensed version, I mean, it should be pretty clear that the right answer is E, because you can refine the model so that the shortfalls are addressed. So that's E. This is what we want. And notice that it says primary, which means we are only looking at which of these is more important. So, I mean, the most important part is not to point out that there are issues. The most important part is to point out that those issues can be addressed by adding in extra factors. So, and then just think about the BMI example again, right? The whole point of that was not so much BMI is not perfect. I mean, the point is that even these imperfections you can address. So, okay, now let's talk about when you review the problems. So, let's talk about these answer choices and stuff. So let's take a fresh screen here. Let me grab this problem and take it over to another screen. Okay. So, all right. When you review these problems, what you want to make sure is, what you want to make sure to do is find words that specifically, maybe these are main idea questions, that specifically make the wrong answers wrong. And then also, I find this is the more important task. The more important task would be to formulate in your head what the passage would look like if that were the correct answer. So meaning if you, actually nobody picked A, but if, like for example, if A were the correct answer to this problem, the passage would be like, okay, if that were the right answer, there'd be a model, but then there would probably, maybe not 100%, but there would probably be some counter evidence. And then the passage would conclude on the note of like, is this even a valid model at all? Like, does this model even have any validity? That doesn't happen in this passage. Okay, choice B. I mean, notice the words of B. I mean, you got to read these things carefully, guys. Notice this word. This is a word. This word means something. This word does not mean inconsistent with reality, which is totally a different thing. What does that mean, guys? Like, what would inconsistencies within a model be? In that case, what would contradict the model? Aha, the model would contradict itself. Yeah. All right, that's totally different. I mean, if I say there are inconsistencies within your story, that is definitely not the same as your story is inconsistent with reality. I mean, notice that this first version means you're contradicting yourself. And the second version means you're lying. I mean, those are not the same at all, right? I mean, if someone contradicts him or herself, then even if I have no idea what actually happened, I can still see that. Whereas I can't say whether someone is lying unless I actually know what the truth is. So these are not the same thing. So if B were the right answer, then B would not have to refer to reality whatsoever. Like, no reference to actual reality in B. Like, B would just say, here's how the model works, but then it would say thing A in the model seems to contradict thing B, which is also in the model. So, right. That would be bad. Okay. Which is that's not what happens here at all. All right. C. What would C look like? I mean, notice in particular that the author would have to actually do this. So think about what C would look like. And C would have a model. But then what's important here is that the author would actually have to have words that say, we should make these changes to the model. Does that really happen here? You can go back and check it out. I mean, here's the part where we blacked out a lot of stuff. The author is not actually advocating any changes here. Here is something that might go wrong, and some people have found that the model works better when they employ broader something. But notice that, I mean, let's uncover what they're using broader. I mean, here they're not even really changing the model. They're changing the data that they use. So basically, it's almost like if they have better data as opposed to changing the model itself. So if you check that out, yeah, there's no suggested changes there. So shouldn't be a matter of opinion. Okay, sorry, I thought you wrote in your opinion. Yeah, there's no opinions. I mean, the blue thing doesn't happen, which is why C is wrong. And then D is not the point either. If D were the point, then the passage would have a very different appearance. If D were the point, then it would say, here's a model, and here is how to apply it to situation A and B, which is not what the passage does. So, doesn't do that. Whereas why it ranged out. So first is a model, inconsistent research results, like, you know, in some applications it's not perfect. But then how to, why it remains valid. So resolution, why not? Why does it look, why does that happen? And then there should be some sort of explanation of a reason that is not a fatal flaw in the model itself. Like there should be an explanation. It should be something other than a flaw in the model. And that's what it was here. Like it was, the explanation here was that if they used these extra data, then they get. So this is the, I mean, when I find those, this is the most important step of review. Like try to take those answer choices and notwithstanding the words that are actually in the passage, just try to make up passages in your head that would support these choices. And you'll find that these are not small differences. I mean, these are big differences. I think a lot of you guys pick choice B, boy, but notice how different that is. I mean, it's super different. Like B not only would not mention any reality-based results, but it would also point out that the passage was talking out of both sides of its face. So choice D would just be, here is a model and here is how to apply it to some situations, and that's it. That's all it would be. So that whole stuff, I mean, basically D, not only do we not really illustrate it too much, but this would just ignore everything that's going on in the second paragraph. The second paragraph's not addressed here at all. Okay, now let's do some details stuff. Here, Here's a question. And here is the condensed table of contents. Here is the not condensed table of contents, actually. That is here. This is a detailed question. Should be finishing this one pretty soon. You have to guess, then just guess. But make sure that you are not staring at the same words. Okay, so let's you should guess something if you don't have something. Remember what the point with detailed questions is. The point is that you have to pick something that must be true. So you're basically proving stuff. You're basically just recycling information. So when you have detailed questions, that's how they work. Right? The correct answers will stay. There's people talk a lot about thinking outside the box, so to speak, but these are going to stay inside the box, as it were. They're just going to recycle given information. And they will be pretty much proved from the stuff in the passage. So make sure that you're doing this. But the question, the real money step, so to speak, is making sure that you are looking for the right stuff. And I mean, one person asked, how will the table of contents help here? The point is that it should function as a real table of contents. Right, so think about what you would do with an actual table of contents in a real nonfiction book. I mean, you can use this as, that's why we're calling it a table of contents. I mean, you can actually use this as a real table of contents. I mean, so it's still, which paragraph are we going to find this in? Right, which of the following is likely to occur, blah, 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 when, blah, blah, blah. This looks like it's an aspect of the model. So, because notice it's not what actually occurs, so it's not the reality part. So this is more like the, this is probably something in the model. So at least your table of contents should assure you that this is in the first paragraph somewhere. And that's, beyond that, we're just going to have to look for it. So, but just make sure that you have a reasonable idea of where to look and what specifically are you looking for. So, where, the answer to where would be paragraph 1. Now, what specifically am I looking for? I mean, to get an idea of the right kind of specificity that I'm talking about here, think about, I know I've used this analogy before in previous sessions of this study hall thing, but like think about contract disputes. I mean, think about the nature of disputes that people have over contracts. Like, they're never vague. It's not like, oh, this whole contract gives me the vague feeling that it is unfair. That's not how it works. I mean, contracts are about incredibly specific things, like, according to the law, anything over 8 hours is considered overtime, but when the time switches back from daylight savings to standard time, that is 9 hours, but looks like 8 hours in the timesheet, so therefore we are not being paid overtime when we should. That's the kind of thing that people dispute in contracts. Incredibly specific things that are about incredibly specific details. So meaning that even if the contract or the relevant law were hundreds of pages long, you could still know exactly where to look. You'd be like, it's not just like, oh, this is a question about overtime, or, oh, this is a question about hours and wages. It's like, dude, this is a question about how the overtime law applies when the clock shifts back by an hour. Specific. So until you know that much specifics, you should not go looking for randomness. So what are you specifically looking for? You're looking for when this reaches high density. So, and there's not really a ton of ways to say density other than density. So why should you condense it? Because condensing it makes it easier to answer the main idea type questions. And remember that your uncondensed table of contents will usually be longer than this. But this one is kind of surprisingly short. So in other words, the condensing is not for this kind of question. The condensing is for the other type of question. The condensing is for main ideas. Because when you get this into like what Vic said. Like when you get it into 5 words, it'll look more like the answers to the main idea question. Okay, so this high density level, if you look at that, and then also the question is, if there were other types of firms discussed, then we would also have to pay more attention to make sure that we were talking about specialist firms. But notice that the model is only about these kinds of firms. I mean, other types of firms are not even discussed. So we don't need to pay as much attention to that because no one is talking about any other kinds of firms. Because, like, in a different passage, if you had, like, here are 5 different kinds of firms, and here's about when they're all at different densities, then we would have to pay attention to that. But here, the orange thing is not as much of a thing, because other firms are not even relevant here. So the real key word that you are looking for is high density level. So when specialist firms reach when they reach high density, the model says what? Okay, if you look for that, blah, 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 here's density levels. Low density levels, I don't want that. At high density levels, competitive effects outweigh something, therefore discouraging foundings. So we know, I don't have any idea what legitimation is, but clearly it is something that supports foundings. And competition is something that discourages foundings, and so the discouraging is winning the game. So I'm not going to write all this down in my notes, but competitive effects which work against foundings are stronger, is what it's saying. It's displayed to a 9-year-old. Legitimation, I have no idea what that means at all, but it is clearly something in favor of foundings. Is weaker, and so foundings will not happen as much. That is pretty much exactly what choice A says, and it has nothing to do with what any of the other choices say. So, as far as the wrong answers here, you don't need to spend as much time thinking about them as you do with main ideas, because the wrong answers here are all just like, whoa, look, they didn't even talk about those things. Or in the case of choice C, it is the direct opposite of what they said. And they said foundings will be discouraged. So choice C says white when you want black. But as far as B, boy, D, dog, and E, elephant, those are just not things that they say if you search for the right thing. So, no, it seemed too obvious. I mean, remember the nature of these things. The very, very, very nature of these questions is that they recycle the information that has already been stated. So, like pretty much every single detail question. I mean, if you've done more than if you said too obvious, then you're probably new to this, or at least I hope so. Because if you've done more than like 5 or 10 of these questions in your life, then you will definitely know that this is always how they work. I mean, they have the answer that looks. I mean, the answers almost always are things that look obvious once you have found the correct stuff, because I mean, just make sure that you guys understand that. I mean, this is, by the way, just miscellaneous point of writing English. When you use to in this way, it has 2 O's. So this is actually a big mistake because it's really hard to read for the reader if you put 1 O there. But just make sure that you understand why this is how the questions work, because this is how they will always work. Like, really always. Because why? I mean, what is the actual challenge that they're trying to address? Like, what is the skill set of these questions? In other words, these detail questions. Like, what are they actually testing your ability to do? They're testing your ability. I mean, again, comprehension is one of those words that means nothing. It's kind of like structure, or this food is good for you. Vagueness is bad. It's finding. If you think strategically, that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, again, think about instructions. Instructions, people. Can you tell someone, hey, think strategically? No, you can't. The skill set is finding things. It's true some managers are good at vagueness. That is true. On these detail questions, I mean, the main skill set tested is your ability to narrow a search and then find stuff. This is what they're testing. Once you find the stuff that is relevant, you will not have to put it through additional twists and turns for the most part, because that's not the point. I mean, if you think that you have to transform the statements, that's a different kind of question. Like, if you taking given information and putting it through further logical steps is the domain of critical reasoning inference problems, not RC. That's a different skill set for a different part of the test. So this is the real point, though. So as far as the words suggest, it is a difference that shouldn't feel like a difference. So just to make sure that it means that the words are not going to be like exactly, but they're still going to have the same meaning. Let me just illustrate by analogy. Okay, let's say the passage says, Ron is shorter than his brother. Okay, according to the passage, or the passage, the author states that, or indicates, Ron is shorter than his brother. The passage suggests or implies Ron's brother is taller than him. Or something like Ron can walk under some objects that his brother would have to duck under. I mean, you get the point, right? We're still saying the same thing. It's just if the words are not, if the statement is transformed in any way, which will still be trivial, then that's what suggest and imply is all about. Let me know if that makes sense. There. Okay. All right, this one, I can throw it up there, although we will have very little, oops, that's not the right page. We will have very little time to discuss this one after we're done with it, because I do have to pretty much cut it at exactly 1/2 hour. But here, yeah, same thing with different words. That's pretty much the deal. So try this one, and then we will spend 2 minutes discussing it, and then we will kill it. Give it a shot. Okay, again, we got it shut down here at whatever hour it is where you're at, 1/2 past. So gives us about a minute here. The question is, what can explain inconsistencies? So inconsistencies are in paragraph 2, and this is not the part about factors that would fix them. It's just why are there inconsistencies? So why? That's the question that we're looking for. And that should be at the start of that paragraph, because that's going to appear before they get into stuff about inconsistencies. That's going to happen before they get into the part about refinements to the model or what have you. So if you look at this, they have found inconsistencies. Well, that's nice. But then they go into explaining that. A possible explanation for that is that some things transcend national boundaries while studies typically don't. So what that says, explained to a 9-year-old, is these businesses are international in some sense, but the studies are not. The studies are within single countries. So, in other words, D-dog, bad. They're international. And then you just have discussion of that. Like if you look a few lines ahead just to make sure they're not giving additional reasons, you'll find that they aren't. Like thus, a national level analysis, blah, blah, blah. Many industries are becoming international, blah, 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 blah. So this is the only real reason they have for inconsistency here is national versus international. So choice D, and the other choices just don't say that, so it's D. Okay, gotta shut down the shop here. Thank you guys. And I do believe that the next session is in 2 weeks, I think at the same time. All right, gotta kill it. Thanks again. See you.